Kelly said, my name is Dakota Moore. I'm with the Kentucky Horticulture Council. We serve all corners of the horticulture industry through education, assistance. We do conferences and in-person workshops as well as webinars. And sometimes we get grants to help people financially. So one of the big industry segments we've been working with lately is the cut flower farmers. We've seen a massive boom in the past few years of cut flower farmers. Just in the last ag census that was released earlier this year, the number of farms almost doubled. I think we're up to 222 farms that filled out the census saying they're growing cut flowers. And the revenue for cut flowers in the state was over $2 million, which is huge. The increase from the last census was over $1.5 million increase. So it's a growing industry. There's a big boom in farms. And so each July, we get to do Kentucky Grown Cut Flower Month promotion. So July is National Cut Flower Month, but here in Kentucky, the Hort Council, as well as our partners at UK Warren County Extension, as well as the Center for Crop Diversification, we promote cut flower farms through farm bios, as well as farmer and customer resources. So helping farmers grow and sell better, as well as helping customers find farmers, and then knowing what to do with their flowers they purchase. So part of that is through floral design videos that we get to go to farms and see how they grow, get to harvest flowers, and then create arrangements in the field with those flowers. So it's really fun. Everything is posted on a Facebook group. That QR code you see on the screen will take you to that group. And I believe they're dropping it in the chat as well, the link to that group. You can also find it on the Hort Council Instagram page as well. So hopefully you can find a farm near you and start purchasing some local flowers. So now we're going to get into to drying cut flowers. So the one thing you're going to have to figure out for yourself is what to dry and what not to dry. So some things dry really well, very easily, and then some things don't dry well at all. And so when you're experimenting with this, you'll want to watch for some stems that just kind of rot. They don't dry, they just get mushy and fall to pieces. And some will get too fragile or brittle. So even if you go to touch it, you look at it and it falls to pieces. So keep an eye out for that. You'll see things that dry really well and some things that don't. And then some things will dry well, but the color stays or changes really drastically and not very pretty. You can see this picture I've got. This is a gladiolus. So we've got both of these issues. We've got the stem that gets mushy and rotted and then the petals that fade, they become squished, and the color is just unredeemable. We can't make this work for anything we want to do, whether we're displaying just a dried bundle or we're actually making a design with the dried flowers. I wish I could give you an easy list of things that dry well and don't, but it's also going to depend on your drying method. And so we'll get into some of those methods. Typically air drying is what you'll be doing, and so that's what we'll cover first. So air drying is the easiest, the most passive way for you to dry cut flowers. You're just basically just hanging things up to dry. You're letting it do its thing. You're not doing much to it. The keys to air drying, though, are dryness. Obviously, we are trying to remove the moisture from the plants that we're hanging up, so we don't want any moisture in the air. That way we can dry faster. We need good ventilation. This is going to allow the moisture that's leaving the stems to then leave the area and allow the things to dry without mildew and mold forming. And then also warmth. So this is one that you may have to figure out for yourself, depending on the conditions of the area that you're drying in. I don't prefer to dry in really warm areas. I've found some things can fade, or the things that I've been drying can fade more the warmer it is. I typically just dry in room temperature, so like the temperature I'm sitting in right now. Drying in too warm can cause some of the color fading and brittleness, but too cold is going to be really slow. We're trying to get the fastest dry possible because that's going to mean better color and better condition of the stems. So this is something you can play around with. If your basement is dry, try drying in your dry basement. It's going to be cooler down there. Or you can try drying in your attic. That's what some people recommend. The attics I've had access to in the past are a little warm. I don't know how that would affect the color, but you can try it out for yourself. A lot of people hang it in their barn to dry. Here in West Kentucky, I don't think I could do that. It's too humid during the time when I've got flowers to dry. So I'm gonna avoid that humid place. Always best to harvest as soon as you can after, or best to dry as soon as you can after harvest. This is when the flowers are at their peak, so we want to dry them at their peak. You can let things sit in your vase for a few days before you dry them, but you may have already seen some decline in those blooms, and that's just going to further decline as you dry. The easiest, most common way to air dry is probably hanging upside down. You're just tying things in a bundle, hanging them up to dry. The reason we hang them upside down, that keeps a lot of the color a lot better than other methods of air drying. We're making sure that moisture that contains that color is staying in those flowers for as long as possible. If we're drying those cells that have that color faster than the bottom, we're going to see that color leaching. Also, we want the really straight stems. By hanging upside down, everything's going to dry as straight as we can get it. This makes for an attractive dried bundle. You can then wrap that in paper if you desire, but upside down, you get those really nice straight stems. You're not having to work with twisted, tangled stems as much as other methods. To do this, you just need to strip your lower leaves. That's going to allow you to create a tighter bundle that's going to hold those stems in place. You want to gather it in a small bunch, secure it with either string, twine, or rubber bands. The string looks very attractive. You can then hang it up very easily. The rubber bands are not as attractive, but you have to keep in mind that your stems are going to shrink. As they dry, they're going to shrivel up some, and then your knot could become loose if you've used string. So that rubber band is going to keep it pretty tight as those stems shrink. You could always do rubber bands and then wrap it in string or twine to cover the rubber bands, and then give you a nice length to then hang up. And then the last thing for hanging upside down, you want to keep in mind to layer the blooms at different heights. That way they don't get smushed or misshapen or mildewy. If you bunched up all your blooms together, there's going to be a lot of petals with a lot of moisture really closely together. That's not going to get as much airflow, and it's not going to dry as nicely. So by staggering those blooms throughout your bundle, you're going to allow for more airflow, better shape of those flowers, and ultimately a more attractive bundle. You can see in these pictures here, the color is spaced throughout that bundle versus just all up at the top. Some things, though, don't dry well hanging upside down, so we need to hang them right side up. It's a little more space consuming and time consuming, but if you want those certain blooms, this might be necessary. Some of the blooms are going to curl up or be closed if you hang them upside down. For example, Queen Anne's lace and some of the asters, those petals and those flower parts are going to fold in and not be recognizable once it's dried. If you were to then use that in a design, you might not know that was Queen Anne's lace. Um, in this picture here, you can see some zinnias with a single layer of petals. These petals might curl in if you hung them upside down. They might curl up like this, and it wouldn't look like a zinnia. It wouldn't be what you want out of the dried flower. A double layered petal zinnia might hold up better hung upside down because there's more petals. It's just going to stay in place better. But some of those single layer petals are going to fold in. Some other things are going to dry in unlifelike shapes. So, for example, the hanging amaranthus, this is a common flower grown by cut flower growers. This one drapes down. It gives a nice long tail-like appearance of a solid bloom. If you were to hang that upside down and it dried stiff, you might just have a giant spike. That's not going to look like a hanging amaranthus. So we may need to pose it in the shape we want by hanging it, off on a wire screen or laying it flat on a screen to give us that shape we want. So you can dry on a wire rack or a wire screen. You want to keep in mind the hole size. So in this picture, they've used some chicken wire. The zinnia is a bigger flower head, so it's not going to fall through those holes, but something like an aster might fall through pretty easily. So you need to use a smaller grid screen. You can also dry in a vase. This is pretty passive. You're just going to leave your flowers how they are in your vase. Whether you leave some water in or dump all the water out is up to you and the flowers you're trying to dry. So if I were to receive flowers from a florist and I wanted to dry those, I could just dump the water out as it got towards the end of the vase life. I'm going to see a lot of those flowers go down and they're not going to dry right. A lot just won't look very attractive dried. So I need to pull those out afterwards, but I might get some salvageable stems from that. You can see in the picture on the left, a straw flower that was allowed to dry in a bent shape. That's going to add a unique curve and shape to any designs I'm using. I wouldn't want to bundle these up and hang them in a bundle because that shape is going to not be right for a bundle, but it's going to be great in a dried arrangement. So you can bend things or get things to curve and have a different shape than just straight up stems, because that's not going to look too attractive in a dried design. You can also dry things with just leaving a little water in the bottom of your vase. Some things might do better this way. A lot of people say that hydrangeas dry a lot better this way. Things like allium with really fleshy stems that may rot if you just pulled it out of water and hung it upside down. And then small, tiny flowers like heather that maybe need to dry in a more natural position than hanging upside down. The water is going to allow them to dry slowly. So we're not removing the water from them completely. We're just giving them a little bit. That way they can slowly close off everything and dry up in a more natural position. And maybe we might lose a little more color, but some things may be better for doing this. This is just something to play around with. Try a few stems out of water and try a few stems in water and see what you like best or what works best for you. There are some other drying methods that I'm going to cover quickly. These are more expensive than just hanging something up. or maybe not so useful for creating designs with our dried flowers. So sand and borax, this is a common drying method. This is a way to keep things in a more lifelike position. So some of the flower heads that just won't look recognizable if they're air dried, whether the petals curl too much or they fold in or they flatten out. This is a way to hold things in position while they dry. The sand and borax, you can do this in an open container. So you can take a box and fill it with sand and dry in that. But this does take a really long time. It takes 3 to 5 weeks typically, which is a lot longer than air drying can be. But it is all reusable, so you just have the one-time expense with these. You want to arrange your flowers pour down a layer of sand or borax, then arrange your flowers on top. Whether you're laying like a long spike flat or you're doing like this picture, you can put geranium blooms. You'll put them face down with the stems sticking up, and then you'll slowly pour your sand or borax around the blooms, making sure they go into every crevice to hold everything in place. That's the point of this. It's a slow dry, but it holds everything in place. You can leave the stems sticking out of the sand. They don't have to be covered because they'll dry on their own. The sand doesn't pull moisture, so you aren't going to get any active drying. It's just going to be a place for the moisture that comes from the flowers. It's just going to pull it away. It's not going to actually pull it out of the plant. With the borax, I've never tried this method, but people that do say it's better to mix 1 part borax to 3 parts cornmeal. This is going to save you money because the borax could get pricey depending on the size of what you're doing. So those are very passive drying methods, very slow drying methods. The next 2 are more chemical. Even though borax is a chemical, these others are considered chemical drying. They're a little more active than the sand and borax. The silica gel, however, is just like the sand and borax. You lay the stems in a layer of it, and then you slowly pour the rest around it. The difference is that this has to be in an airtight container. Silica gel is a desiccant, so it pulls moisture out of things, out of the air and out of the stems. The reason for the airtight container is that if it was open, it would just pull the moisture from the air instead of pulling it from the stems we're trying to dry. The key with the silica gel is timing. So it takes 5 to 10 days typically, but it's going to be different for each type of flower or stem. The issue is that if you leave it in too long, it will start to pull out the color and it will make things more brittle. So you have to get the timing down just right. This will be something to play around with if you decide to use the silica gel. The biggest kicker with these is that they will reabsorb moisture very easily if they're kept when you pull them out of the gel. So if you were to dry it with the silica gel and then decide you wanted to display it on your coffee table, it's going to start pulling moisture from your air back into those plants. This silica gel is usually done for preserving things that are going to be on display in a museum or other airtight containers, maybe a glass case, something that isn't going to have a lot of moisture. It keeps the color and the shape very well. The color is probably the closest you'll get from drying, but that is the issue. You can't just display it on your table for very long. The next chemical is glycerin. So this is one that also gives you really nice color most of the time, but you'll also have a really lifelike feel and appearance. So the way you do the glycerin, you put your cut stems in a vase, and then you add, you pour in the glycerin. The stems then pull up the glycerin like water, so it comes into every cell, and that's how it preserves the flower. but it will darken the color. You can see in that picture, this is magnolia leaves. The background is the fresh green stems, and the foreground is the dried or preserved through glycerin. Some things will darken more than others. Some will keep pretty similar color. This can be expensive and a little messy though. And it can also be time consuming because you're pouring this every few days as they suck up the glycerin. You have to keep adding it. And the glycerin can get pricey. So if that's something you want to something you want to try, maybe in small quantities is best to start. And then pressing flowers. That's our last drying method. This is a classic drying method. We all did this in school where we put a few flowers between some newspaper and set some books on it. It keeps pretty good color, but everything is now 2D. Flowers then can't be used in design, but you could use the foliage because a lot of the foliage we use in fresh floral designs are sort of 2D. So ferns, magnolia leaves even are used that way. So you can use those in 3D dried designs after pressing. The way you can get this foliage to be not so flat and look a little more lifelike would be to not use any weights. We're just going to create a large stack of newspaper with the foliage layered in between the newspaper. And this is going to allow more airflow. You do get a little weight from the stacks of newspaper, but there's more airflow. So it's going to help with the drying by removing any moisture that the newspaper helps to pull out. Now, quickly, I'm just going to go through a few Kentucky-grown flowers that dry really well, or dry in unique ways that add special interest to bundles or bouquets. Straw flower is our first one. This flower looks pretty much the same dried or fresh. The flower heads are so papery. There's not much moisture in them, it seems like. So when they dry, they look almost the same. You don't have much color fading. This is one I've seen if you dry it in a too warm location, it can start to fade faster. So I've had flower heads pop off in my car. As that gets hot, they turn brown. So you want to avoid the heat as much as possible. But room temperature would be great for straw flower. The stems do get really thin and not strong enough to support the flower head. So you can either use wire to secure these if you want them in an upright position, or you can pop off those flower heads, glue them onto a wreath. They're really fun to use. Marigolds, this is a very common garden plant. It's a great companion plant for your vegetables, but a lot of cut flower growers are growing some really gorgeous varieties, super long stems, massive flower heads, and they dry really nicely too. You lose some of the shape. They may look a little smushed as those petals dry and curl up a bit, but you're still left with that bright orange, yellow, or white even color once it's dried. It makes a great pop into arrangements or bundles. Zinnias, they dry pretty similar to the marigolds. They do curl up and maybe bunch up a bit, but a lot of the time you still have that really nice color. Some of the lighter colors will look more tan or brown, but the warmer, bright colors will keep their color pretty similarly. Another favorite of mine is the safflower. So this one is fun to use fresh, and it's really cool dried. Fresh, we've got the kind of spiky looking leaves, the thistle-like head with the bright orange coming out of the top. When it's dried, we keep those spiky looking leaves. The green fades to a nice tan color, and we keep that bright orange plume out the top. It's really fun, fresh or dried. Eucalyptus, really common dried plant. It's probably the easiest to find commercially. You can find it at most home goods stores. Typically there, it's been treated with the glycerin. So that's how they keep a little softer touch, a more fleshy look. I'm not sure if the glycerin is what helps them smell so strong or if they spray something on it. I have a feeling they're spraying the scent on it as well. But you can easily air dry this too. It keeps that gray looking color for a little while. It will turn a darker brown over time, but most of your dried flowers are going to do that. But eucalyptus is a great one. To hang up, it looks really nice just bundled by itself, depending on the type of eucalyptus. This long eucalyptus or baby blue eucalyptus um, looks really nice just in a dried bundle. Kentucky native Solidago. So this is a very common florist filler, but it's there. I think there's like 30 something varieties of Solidago that are native to Kentucky. It's also called goldenrod, but this is a great one to dry. It keeps that really showy bloom. The color fades just a little bit, but it's still really nice. My one recommendation would be you may need to pull off some of the small leaves. They tend to curl up and crisp up really easily. And if that becomes an issue for you, like you're shedding a lot of them or it just doesn't look good, you might need to thin out some of those leaves before you dry. In our last few, we've got the billy buttons or the billy balls or Cresspedia. This is a fun favorite. These look dried when they're on the plant. You can't really tell a difference in the yellow flower head at the top when it's dried or fresh. And the stem, even when it's fresh, kind of has that grayish tint to it. So it's really easy to dry. It's really fun in arrangements or bundles. So if you ever see these, grab me some. They're really easy way to get started with drying. And our last one is Celosia. This is a common garden plant. The coxcomb varieties are popular. I've got some plume pictured here, but the plumes come in so many different colors and different uses. The coxcomb, you can get the really big ones down to the really small ones. The issue with drying these, even though they keep their color pretty well, is the seeds. They'll drop 1,000 seeds. You'll hang it up to dry and then you'll look down and you'll have a big puddle of tiny black seeds. You can try to harvest before they set seed. That's really hard to do unless you're really checking closely. But if you don't care about the mess or you want to put like a bucket underneath it to catch everything, should be a really easy thing to dry. And that's it. There's my email if anybody has any questions.